My name is Victoria Blackwood, and 3 months ago, I thought I was attending my father's funeral as a grieving daughter. I had no idea I was walking into the beginning of a war that would expose 30 years of lies, destroy relationships I thought were unbreakable, and reveal that the man I called father had been living a triple life that would make a spy novel seem tame. When the lawyer read his will, I expected the usual distribution: the family business to my older brother James, the house to my stepmother Caroline, maybe a trust fund for me and my younger sister Emma. What I didn't expect was to inherit a storage unit I'd never heard of, containing documents that would prove my father had been systematically stealing from his own family for decades. But that was just the beginning, because what I found in that storage unit didn't just reveal financial fraud. It revealed that my father had been married to 3 different women simultaneously, that I had half-siblings I'd never met, that the family fortune everyone was fighting over was built on insurance fraud, embezzlement, and one very carefully planned murder. And the most devastating discovery of all? One of those 3 wives was still alive, and she'd been planning her revenge for 27 years. This is the story of how a storage unit key destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life, and how uncovering the truth about my father's lies became the most dangerous thing I've ever done. To understand how everything unraveled, you need to know what I thought my family was. Robert Blackwood was, by all accounts, a successful man. He owned Blackwood Industries, a construction company that had built half the commercial buildings in our city, married to my mother Catherine for 15 years until she died in a car accident when I was 12. Then married Caroline 3 years later, a widow with her own children who blended seamlessly into our family. Or so I thought. I was the middle child. James, 5 years older, was being groomed to take over the business. Emma, 3 years younger, was the baby everyone adored. Caroline brought her son David and daughter Michelle into our lives, and suddenly we were this big, chaotic, loving family. We lived in the Blackwood Mansion, a massive Victorian house that had been in the family for generations. Sunday dinners with 15 people around the table, holiday traditions that felt ancient and sacred, a legacy that felt solid as stone. James worked at the company from the time he was 16. By 25, he was Dad's right hand. By 30, he was essentially running the day-to-day operations while Dad focused on bigger picture strategies. Emma became a doctor, but she always planned to come back and run the company's medical insurance division once she finished her residency. David, Caroline's son, became the family lawyer. Convenient, having legal counsel right in the family. Michelle married young and moved to California, but she visited every Christmas with her growing family. And me? I was the family disappointment. The one who went to art school instead of business school, who lived in a tiny apartment downtown instead of the suburban mansion Dad offered to buy me, who painted portraits and taught children's art classes instead of joining the family empire. But even as the black sheep, I was loved, included, part of something bigger than myself. Dad would call me every Sunday. "My little artist," he'd say with pride. Someone has to keep us cultured. When he had his heart attack at 68, we were all there. James holding his hand, Emma checking his vitals, Caroline crying softly, me painting his portrait so we'd have something to remember the man he was before the illness changed him. He lingered for 6 months, enough time for long conversations about regrets and love and legacy, enough time for him to tell each of us how proud he was, how sorry he was for his mistakes, how much he wanted us to take care of each other after he was gone. When he died, we grieved together. When we planned the funeral, we worked as a team. When we prepared for the will reading, we assumed we knew what to expect. We were so naive. The law office was familiar. David had been Dad's lawyer for years, but for the will reading, Dad had specified we use an outside firm. To avoid any appearance of impropriety, the letter had said. Margaret Peterson was the kind of lawyer who'd seen everything and was surprised by nothing. She laid out the will with the efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times. To James. The business as expected, Blackwood Industries, valued at $12 million. To Caroline, the house and grounds, plus a trust fund worth $2 million. To Emma, a trust fund worth $1.5 million, plus Dad's medical research investments. To David, $1 million and Dad's law library. To Michelle, $1 million and grandmother's jewelry collection. And to me, the contents of Storage Unit 247 at Secure Space Storage on Maple Street, plus any financial obligations or benefits thereof. Everyone laughed. "Typical Dad," James said, giving the artist the storage unit full of old furniture and photo albums. But Margaret Peterson wasn't laughing. "Miss Blackwood," she said carefully, "your father left specific instructions that you were to examine the contents of the storage unit privately before any family discussions about the inheritance. He also left this letter for you to read alone." She handed me an envelope with my name written in Dad's handwriting. The letter was short. "Victoria, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and it's time for you to learn the truth about our family. What you find in the storage unit will be difficult to understand and harder to accept. But you're the only one I trust to handle this information responsibly. I've made terrible mistakes that built the fortune everyone is inheriting. Before you decide what to do with what you learn, remember that sometimes protecting the people you love means carrying secrets that destroy you. The key to the storage unit is in my desk drawer, hidden behind the false back. The combination to the lockbox inside is your mother's birthday. I'm sorry for putting this burden on you. You're stronger than you know. All my love, Dad." I stared at the letter, feeling the first crack in the foundation of everything I thought I knew. "Is there a problem?" Caroline asked. "No problem," I lied. "Just sentimental dad stuff. You know how he was." But James was watching me carefully. He'd always been able to read me better than anyone. That night, I drove to the storage facility alone. Unit 247 was in the back corner of the facility, away from the main traffic. I'd expected boxes of Christmas decorations or old business files. Instead, I found a carefully organized archive of deception. The lockbox was sitting on a metal desk in the center of the unit. Mom's birthday, 08/47/1963. It opened easily. Inside were folders, dozens of them, each labeled with names I didn't recognize and dates going back 30 years. I opened the first folder. Catherine Morrison, 1985-2000. My mother's maiden name was Patterson. Who was Catherine Morrison? The folder contained a marriage certificate dated 1985. Robert Blackwood and Catherine Morrison, a marriage that had supposedly ended in divorce in 2000. But my mother died in 2000. She didn't get divorced. My hands were shaking as I opened the next folder. Linda Blackwood, 1987-2014. Another marriage certificate, Robert Blackwood and Linda Walsh married in 1987. Divorced in 2014. I'd never heard the name Linda Walsh in my life. The third folder made my blood run cold. Caroline Stevens, 1995 present. Caroline's maiden name was Stevens, but she'd married Dad in 2003, 3 years after Mom died. According to this certificate, Dad had married Caroline in 1995, 5 years before Mom died, 8 years before their official wedding. I sat down hard on a dusty box trying to process what I was seeing. My father had been married to 3 women simultaneously, but that was just the beginning. Each folder contained more than marriage certificates. They contained bank statements, property deeds, insurance policies, and most disturbing of all, detailed surveillance reports. Dad had been having all 3 wives followed, documented, photographed. The Catherine Morrison folder contained photos of my mother that I'd never seen. Photos of her with another man, at restaurants, holding hands, kissing. The surveillance reports were dated just months before her death. The Linda Walsh folder was thicker. Photos, yes, but also financial records showing money being funneled from Blackwood Industries into accounts under her name. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. And Carolyn's folder? Carolyn's folder contained something that made me physically sick. Insurance policies. Life insurance policies on all 3 wives, with Robert Blackwood as the beneficiary. Policies worth millions of dollars each. Catherine Morrison had died in a car accident in 2000. Payout, $3 million. Linda Walsh had died in a house fire in 2014. Payout, $4 million. And Carolyn? Carolyn had a policy worth $5 million taken out just last year. I found myself hyperventilating in that storage unit, surrounded by evidence that my father had been a serial bigamist who'd possibly murdered 2 of his wives for insurance money. But there was more. A final folder labeled Children. Inside were birth certificates, school records, and photos of children I'd never seen before. Children who looked like me, like James, like Emma. Robert Blackwood, Jr., born to Linda Walsh in 1989. He would be 34 now. Maria Blackwood, born to Catherine Morrison in 1992. She would be 31. Thomas Walsh Blackwood, born to Linda Walsh in 1995. He would be 28. I had siblings, half-siblings, who had no idea I existed, just like I'd had no idea they existed. And according to the final document in the folder, one of them had been looking for answers about their father's death. Robert Blackwood Jr. had hired a private investigator 3 months ago to look into his father's estate and his legal rights as an heir. My phone rang, startling me in the silence of the storage unit. James. Vic, where are you? Carolyn's worried. You left the lawyer's office looking like you'd seen a ghost. I stared at the folders spread around me. Evidence of 30 years of lies. Evidence that might prove my father was a murderer. Evidence that could destroy the family I'd grown up loving. I'm fine, I lied. Just processing everything. The storage unit is mostly junk. Old business files. Need help going through it? No, I said too quickly. It's fine. I can handle it. After I hung up, I sat in that storage unit until dawn, reading every document, studying every photo, trying to understand how the man who'd raised me with such love and care could have lived such a monstrous double life, and planning what I was going to do with the most dangerous inheritance anyone had ever received. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Instead, I did what Dad had taught me to do when facing a complex problem. I organized the information. I rented my own storage unit and moved everything there. Then I created a timeline, a family tree, and a list of questions that needed answers. The first question was the most important. Were Linda Walsh and Catherine Morrison actually dead? Or were these elaborate insurance frauds? I started with Linda Walsh. According to the newspaper clipping in her folder, she died in a house fire in Denver in 2014. No survivors. House was a total loss. But when I called the Denver Fire Department and asked about the investigation, I learned something interesting. The fire had been ruled accidental, but there had been some questions about accelerants that were never fully resolved. The case had been closed due to lack of evidence, but the investigator I spoke to remembered it as unusual. Catherine Morrison was harder to track. The car accident had happened locally, and I remembered it because it was how I thought my mother died. But Catherine Morrison wasn't my mother. My mother was Catherine Blackwood, née Patterson. Which meant either my father had been using false documents to create fake identities for his wives, or my entire understanding of my mother's identity was wrong. I spent a week at the Hall of Records, going through death certificates, marriage licenses, and property records. What I found was a masterpiece of identity manipulation. Catherine Patterson Blackwood had never existed in any official capacity. There was no marriage certificate, no divorce decree, no death certificate. The woman I'd called my mother my entire life had been officially Catherine Morrison, married to Robert Blackwood since 1985. Which meant James, Emma, and I were legally the children of Catherine Morrison, not Catherine Patterson, and that meant we were entitled to part of Catherine Morrison's estate. An estate that had been inherited by Robert Blackwood when she died, and which he'd used to build Blackwood Industries into the empire it was today. But the most shocking discovery came when I searched for Linda Walsh's children. Robert Blackwood Jr. wasn't just looking for information about his inheritance. He was working with a private investigator named Marcus Chin, and according to the preliminary report I found in Dad's files, they'd already identified Caroline as their father's surviving wife. They were planning to contest the will. More than that, they suspected Robert Blackwood of murdering their mother. I realized I wasn't the only one who'd inherited dangerous secrets. I was just the only one who'd inherited them intentionally. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Victoria Blackwood, we need to talk. R.B. Jr." My half-brother had found me. We met at a coffee shop downtown, far from any place I might encounter family members. Robert Blackwood Jr. looked exactly like James would have looked if James had been born with our father's darker coloring and our mother's bone structure. The resemblance was unmistakable and disturbing. With him was a woman about my age, with the same distinctive Blackwood jaw and our father's intense green eyes. Maria, I realized, my half-sister, and Marcus Chen, the private investigator, a serious man in his 50s who looked like he'd seen every kind of family secret imaginable. "You look like him," was the first thing Robert said to me. "So do you," I replied. We sat in awkward silence for a moment, three siblings who'd grown up completely unaware of each other's existence. "What do you know?" Maria asked finally. I'd prepared for this moment, but I still wasn't sure how much to reveal. These were strangers, but they were also family, and they were clearly as confused and angry as I was. "I know he was married to 3 women simultaneously," I said carefully. "I know he took out life insurance policies on all of them, and I know 2 of them are dead." Robert leaned forward. "What else?" "I know he kept detailed surveillance records on all 3 wives, and I know he left me evidence of all of this deliberately." Marcus spoke for the first time. "Miss Blackwood, we believe your father murdered our mother. We have evidence that the house fire was arson, and that your father was in Denver the night she died." He slid a folder across the table. "These are phone records showing calls between your father and a known arsonist in the weeks before Linda's death, bank records showing payments to the same man, and security footage placing your father at a hotel 20 minutes from Linda's house on the night of the fire." I stared at the documents, feeling sick. Why are you showing me this? Because, Maria said, we think Caroline is next, and we think you might be the only person who can stop it. She pulled out her own folder. Your father increased Caroline's life insurance policy 6 times in the past 2 years. He's been liquidating business assets and moving money into offshore accounts, and 3 weeks before he died, he met with the same arsonist who killed our mother. That's impossible, I said. He was in the hospital 3 weeks before he died. He was barely conscious. Robert shook his head. He was released for 4 hours for medical tests that don't appear in any hospital records. Marcus tracked his movements. He went to a diner on the other side of town and met with a man named Eddie Torino. Marcus added, Eddie Torino has been linked to at least 12 suspicious fires over the past 20 years, all ruled accidental, all involving life insurance payouts. I felt like I was drowning. Why would he plan Caroline's murder if he was dying anyway? Because, Maria said quietly, he wasn't planning it for himself. He was planning it for his other children, your siblings, the ones who thought they were inheriting a legitimate fortune. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You think James and Emma know? We think they're being set up to inherit the proceeds of murder, Robert said. Just like you are. Just like we were supposed to be before we started digging. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Miss Blackwood, we need to know, are you willing to help us expose the truth even if it destroys your family? I looked at these strangers, who were my siblings, at the evidence of my father's crimes spread across a coffee shop table, at the crossroads between protecting the people I'd grown up loving and seeking justice for the people they'd unknowingly wronged. What exactly are you asking me to do? Help us save Caroline's life, Maria said, and help us make sure your father's victims get the justice they deserve. I thought about Caroline, who'd been nothing but kind to me for 15 years. Caroline, who had no idea she was married to a serial killer. Caroline, who was living in a house bought with the proceeds of murder, sleeping in a bed next to a man who was planning her death. What do you need me to do? The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. We needed to get Caroline away from the house and into protective custody without alerting the rest of the family that anything was wrong. We needed to gather enough evidence to prove Robert Blackwood's crimes, and we needed to do it all before Eddie Torino carried out whatever plan Dad had put in motion. Marcus had contacts in law enforcement, but we needed more evidence before they could act. The surveillance photos and financial records were suspicious, but not enough to prove murder. What we needed was access to Dad's personal files, his computer, and his safety deposit box, which meant I needed to get back into the family house without arousing suspicion. The next morning I called Caroline. I've been thinking about Dad's storage unit, I told her. There are some family photos and personal items I'd like to go through with everyone. Would you mind if I came over this afternoon? Of course, sweetheart. James is coming by anyway to go through your father's office. Emma's driving up from the city. It'll be nice to have the family together. Perfect. And terrifying. I spent the morning with Marcus, learning how to use the tiny cameras and recording devices he'd given me. If I was going to betray my family's trust, I was going to do it thoroughly. The Blackwood mansion felt different when I walked in that afternoon. The same furniture, the same smells, the same family photos on the mantel. But now I knew that half the people in those photos had been living lies, and the other half had been victims of those lies. Caroline hugged me at the door, the same warm embrace she'd been giving me for 15 years. Looking at her now, knowing what I knew, I could see the resemblance to the surveillance photos. The same Caroline who'd been unknowingly photographed, going to work, coming home, living her normal life while her husband planned her murder. James was in Dad's office, going through financial records. Hey, Vic, find anything interesting in the storage unit? Just old family stuff, I lied. attaching one of Marcus's cameras to the underside of Dad's desk while James was distracted. Mostly business records I don't understand. Want me to take a look? Some of it might be relevant to the company transition. Maybe later. I'm not done sorting through everything yet. Emma arrived an hour later, and for a moment, it felt like old times. The four of us, Caroline, James, Emma, and me, sitting around the kitchen table, sharing memories of Dad, talking about plans for the memorial service we were planning. Except I was wearing a wire, and I was recording everything they said, looking for any sign that James or Emma knew the truth about Dad's crimes. What I found was worse than knowledge. I found innocence. James talked about expanding the business, about honoring Dad's legacy, about making sure the company continued to employ the hundreds of people who depended on it. Emma talked about the medical research foundation Dad had wanted to establish, about using his life insurance money to fund scholarships for disadvantaged students. Caroline talked about turning the house into a bed and breakfast, something she and Dad had always planned to do in retirement. They were all planning futures built on blood money, and they had no idea. While they talked, I excused myself to use the bathroom and slipped into Dad's office. James had left his laptop open, logged into the company's financial system. I plugged in Marcus's flash drive and downloaded everything I could in the 5 minutes I had. But as I was about to leave, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. On Dad's desk calendar, there was an appointment for next week. See, 3 p.m., final arrangements. Caroline was scheduled to die next Tuesday. I took a photo of the calendar and slipped back into the kitchen, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Caroline asked. "You look pale." "Just tired," I managed. "It's been a lot to process." I stayed for dinner, playing the role of the grieving daughter while mentally planning how to save Caroline's life without destroying my siblings' innocence. After dinner, I hugged everyone goodbye, knowing it might be the last time I could do so as a daughter and sister, rather than as a witness against them. As I was leaving, James walked me to my car.
"Vic, are you sure you're okay? You've been acting strange since the will reading."
I looked at my older brother, the man who'd protected me my whole life, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and walked me down the aisle at my college graduation when Dad was traveling for business. "James," I said carefully, "if you found out something terrible about Dad, something that could hurt the family, what would you do?" He studied my face in the porch light. "I'd want to know the truth, whatever it was, and I'd want to protect the people I love." "Even if protecting them meant they'd hate you?" "Especially then." I hugged him, knowing I was about to do exactly that. I met Robert, Maria, and Marcus at a 24-hour diner at midnight. "Tuesday," I told them, showing them the photo of Dad's calendar. "He has Caroline scheduled for final arrangements on Tuesday." Marcus was already on his phone. "I'm calling Detective Williams. We need to move fast." But when he hung up, his expression was grim. "The evidence we have is still circumstantial. They can't arrest Eddie Torino without more proof, and they can't put Caroline in protective custody unless she agrees to it." "So we tell her," Maria said. "We show her everything and let her decide." "And if she doesn't believe us?" Robert asked. "If she thinks we're trying to con her out of her inheritance?" I knew Caroline. She was trusting, loyal, and deeply in love with the memory of the man she'd been married to for 20 years. She wouldn't believe us, not without overwhelming proof. "There's another way," I said slowly. "We catch Eddie Torino in the act." Marcus shook his head. "Too dangerous. If something goes wrong, Caroline dies." "If we do nothing, Caroline dies anyway," I pointed out. "At least this way we control the situation." We spent the rest of the night planning what Marcus called the most insane sting operation ever conceived by civilians. The plan? I would convince Caroline to leave town for the weekend, ostensibly for a sister's spa retreat. Meanwhile, we would set up surveillance in and around the house, waiting for Eddie Torino to make his move. When he showed up to start the fire, we'd have the police waiting. It was dangerous, complicated, and dependent on about 50 things going exactly right. It was also our only chance. Sunday morning, I called Caroline. "I've been thinking," I told her. "This has been so hard on all of us. What would you say to a little getaway, just us girls?" Emma's stressed about her residency, and I could use some time away from all the estate stuff. Caroline was immediately enthusiastic. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Where were you thinking?" "There's a spa resort upstate. Very peaceful. We could leave Friday, come back Sunday." "Perfect. I'll call Emma." Phase 1? Accomplished. But as we finalized the surveillance plan, Marcus received information that changed everything. "Eddie Torino is dead," he told us. "Died in a car accident 3 days ago." We stared at each other, trying to process this development. "So, Caroline's safe?" I asked. "Maybe," Marcus said. "Or maybe your father had a backup plan." He pulled out a new folder. "I've been digging deeper into your father's finances. The payments to Eddie Torino stopped 6 months ago, but there are new payments to a company called Precision Services." "What's Precision Services?" "A cleaning company, except they don't actually clean buildings. They specialize in what they call problem elimination for wealthy clients who need discretion." Robert leaned forward. "You mean hitmen?" "I mean professional killers who make deaths look like accidents. And according to the payment schedule, they received their final payment last week." The room went silent as we realized what this meant. Dad hadn't just planned Caroline's death. He'd planned it as a murder disguised as an accident, carried out by professionals who wouldn't be traced back to Eddie Torino or anyone else. Caroline wasn't scheduled to die in a fire on Tuesday. She was scheduled to die in whatever way would look most natural on whatever day would be most convenient for the killers. And we had no idea when that would be. "We have to tell her," I said. "Now, tonight." "Victoria," Marcus said gently, "there's something else you need to know. Something I found in your father's final communications with Precision Services." He handed me a document that made me understand why Dad had left me the storage unit, and why he trusted me with the truth about his crimes. The contract wasn't just for Caroline's death. It was for the deaths of anyone who might expose his secrets, including his daughter Victoria Blackwood. If she became a problem, my father hadn't just left me evidence of his crimes. He'd also left me on a hit list. I called an emergency family meeting for that night. "What's this about, Vic?" James asked when everyone had gathered in the living room. "You sounded panicked on the phone." I looked around at their faces. Caroline, trusting and concerned. Emma, curious and a little annoyed at being called away from her hospital shift. James, protective and already suspicious that something was seriously wrong. And in the corner of the room, Marcus Chen, whom I'd introduced as a family friend who was helping me with some legal questions about Dad's estate. "I need to tell you all something about Dad," I began. "Something that's going to be very hard to hear." For the next hour, I laid out everything. The bigamy, the insurance policies, the surveillance, the evidence of murder. I showed them the marriage certificates, the bank records, the photos of their father with women they'd never known existed. Emma was the first to break down. "This is impossible. Dad wasn't. He couldn't have." "Vic, this is insane," James said, but his voice was shaking. "Are you having some kind of breakdown? Is this grief talking?" Caroline sat in stunned silence, staring at the photo of herself being watched by private investigators hired by her own husband. "There's more," I said, and introduced Robert and Maria, who'd been waiting in Marcus's car. When my half-siblings walked into the room, the resemblance was undeniable. Emma gasped. James went completely white. "Oh my God," Caroline whispered. "Robert, you look exactly like James did at your age." "Mrs. Blackwood," Robert said gently, "we're sorry to meet you under these circumstances, but you need to know that you're in danger." Marcus took over then, explaining about Precision Services, about the contract on Caroline's life, about the fact that I was also targeted for elimination. By the time he finished, Emma was sobbing. James was pacing the room like a caged animal. Caroline was sitting perfectly still, as if moving might shatter her completely. "This isn't possible," James kept saying. "Dad loved us. He loved Caroline. He wouldn't—" "James," Maria said quietly, "he killed our mother. We have proof." "Then why didn't you go to the police?" Emma demanded through her tears. "Why come to us with this conspiracy theory?" "Because," Robert said, "the police need more evidence than we have, and because we wanted to save Caroline's life and give you the chance to do the right thing." "The right thing?" James turned on him. "The right thing would be to leave our family alone instead of coming here with these lies about our father." "Are they lies?" I asked quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. "James, you've been running the company for 5 years. Have you ever seen the books for the Morrison construction account?" His face went pale. "How do you know about Morrison Construction?" "Because Catherine Morrison was our mother's real name, and the Morrison Construction account has been funneling money to offshore accounts for 20 years. James sat down heavily. I thought it was a subsidiary. Dad said it was for tax purposes." "Emma," I continued, "the medical research foundation Dad wanted you to run, it's funded by life insurance money from women he murdered." Emma was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "Victoria, what are you saying?" "I'm saying we have a choice. We can pretend we never learned this and hope Caroline doesn't die in whatever accident is planned for her. We can hope I don't die for knowing too much. We can keep living off blood money and pretend we're honoring Dad's legacy." I stood up, facing my family, all of them, biological and chosen. "Or we can do something about it." Caroline finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "What kind of accidents?" Marcus answered. "Based on your husband's previous methods, it could be anything. A fall down the stairs, a gas leak, a car malfunction. Something that would look natural and wouldn't trigger an insurance investigation." "How long do I have?" "We don't know. The contract just says, at the appropriate opportunity." Caroline stood up slowly, walked to the mantel, and picked up a family photo. All of us together at last Christmas, smiling and happy and completely oblivious to the truth. 27 years, she said. I was married to him for 27 years. She set down the photo and turned to face us. What do we need to do? Marcus checked Helen Zhang's background. 3 previous clients had died within 24 hours of her visits, all from accidents that occurred immediately after they'd signed insurance forms that were actually waivers absolving Precision Services of liability. "She's going to poison you," Marcus told Caroline bluntly. "Probably something that mimics a heart attack or stroke. Quick, relatively painless, and nearly impossible to detect unless you know what to look for." Caroline nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Then we catch her doing it." The plan was intricate. Caroline would wear a wire and a hidden camera. Marcus and Detective Williams would be in an unmarked van outside. James and I would be in the house, hidden but close enough to intervene if something went wrong. Emma couldn't handle it. She left for the hospital, saying she'd rather save lives than watch someone try to take one. Robert and Maria would monitor from Marcus's backup location, ready to call additional law enforcement if needed. Friday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that makes everything feel ominous. Helen Zhang was exactly what you'd expect from a professional killer, disguised as an insurance agent. Middle-aged, forgettable, with a warm smile and a briefcase full of official-looking documents. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm so sorry for your loss," she said as Caroline led her into the living room. "I know this is a difficult time, but we need to finalize your husband's policy so you can receive your benefits." I was hidden in the kitchen, watching through the doorway, my heart pounding as I listened to Helen's performance. "Now," Helen continued, "I just need you to sign a few forms, and then I have a complimentary bottle of champagne from the company to celebrate your husband's life and your new financial security." The champagne. That was how she was going to do it. Caroline played her part perfectly. "That's so thoughtful. Robert always said your company had excellent customer service." "He was a valued client," Helen replied, opening the champagne with practiced ease. "This is a special vintage, very rare. Your husband specifically requested that we provide it to you after his passing." She poured 2 glasses, keeping careful track of which one was which. "A toast," Helen said, raising her glass. "To Robert Blackwood's memory and to your bright future." Caroline lifted her glass, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she was actually going to drink it. Instead, she said, "Before we toast, I have a question about the policy. My stepdaughter Victoria has been helping me with the paperwork, and she noticed some discrepancies in the dates." Helen's smile flickered for just an instant. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Well, according to these documents, Robert took out this policy in 1995, but we weren't married until 2003. I'm sure it's just a clerical error. And then there's this other policy for a woman named Linda Walsh, also taken out by my husband, also worth several $millions." Helen set down her champagne glass, her hand moving toward her briefcase. "Mrs. Blackwood, I think there's been some confusion." "No confusion," Caroline said, her voice steady as steel. "I know exactly who you are and why you're here." Helen lunged for her briefcase, but James burst through the front door at that moment, followed by Detective Williams and 2 uniformed officers. "Helen Zhang, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder," Detective Williams announced. Helen's composure cracked completely. "You don't understand. I was just following orders. The contract was already paid for." "Whose orders?" Detective Williams demanded.
Robert Blackwood's. He hired us months ago. Said his wife needed to have an accident after he died to protect his real children from having to share the inheritance.
The room went dead silent. Caroline sank into a chair, the full weight of her husband's betrayal finally hitting her. "He really did plan to have me killed," she whispered. Helen, apparently realizing she'd just confessed to conspiracy to commit murder, tried a different approach. "Look, I'll make you a deal.
I'll tell you everything about Precision Services, give you all our client records, help you shut down the whole operation. But I want immunity. Detective Williams looked at Marcus, who nodded. Start talking. What Helen Zhang told us in the next hour destroyed any remaining illusions about my father. Precision Services had been Robert Blackwood's go-to solution for problems for over 15 years. Not just wives who'd become inconvenient, but business rivals who asked too many questions, former employees who threatened to expose company secrets, and anyone else who posed a threat to his carefully constructed empire. Your father was one of our best clients, Helen said matter-of-factly. Very methodical, very patient. He'd plan operations months or even years in advance. Linda Walsh hadn't just been murdered for insurance money. She'd discovered Robert's bigamy and threatened to expose him unless he divorced his other wives and made their children his sole heirs. Catherine Morrison, my mother, had been killed because she'd hired a private investigator to look into Robert's business dealings after she suspected him of embezzlement. She was getting too close to the truth about the Morrison construction account, Helen explained. Your father couldn't afford to let her keep digging. Caroline had been marked for death, not just for insurance money, but because Robert suspected she was beginning to ask questions about his frequent business trips and unexplained absences. He was getting sloppy in his old age, Helen said. Paranoid, he thought everyone was catching on to his secrets. But the most devastating revelation came when Helen pulled out a file marked secondary targets. Your father was very thorough about eliminating potential problems, she said, handing the file to Detective Williams. If anyone started asking the wrong questions after his death, we had authorization to solve those problems. The file contained detailed profiles on James, Emma, and me, along with plans for making our deaths look accidental if we discovered too much about Robert's crimes. James had been marked for elimination if he found the hidden accounts during his transition to company leadership. Emma was targeted if she tried to investigate the Medical Research Foundation's funding sources, and I was marked for death the moment I opened that storage unit. Whether I found anything suspicious or not.
He didn't trust you to keep quiet, Helen told me. Said you were too moral, too stubborn. If you found evidence of his crimes, you'd go to the police, no matter what it cost the family.
I stared at this woman who'd been planning my murder while discussing it like a business transaction. How many people did you kill for him?
Directly, 3. Linda Walsh, Catherine Morrison, and a business partner named Frank Stevens, who was embezzling from the company.
She paused.
Well, who Robert claimed was embezzling. Turned out Frank had discovered that Robert was embezzling and was planning to report him.
Caroline made a choking sound.
Frank Stevens was my first husband. He died in a boating accident 5 years before I met Robert.
Helen nodded.
Mechanical failure. Very hard to detect if you know what you're doing.
The room spun around me as I processed what this meant. Caroline hadn't just been Robert's third wife. She'd been his victim from the very beginning. He'd murdered her first husband, then swooped in to comfort the grieving widow. All as part of an elaborate, long-term plan to access the Stevens family fortune. How long? Caroline whispered. How long was he planning this?
Helen consulted her notes. According to our records, he first contacted us about Frank Stevens in 1998. Started surveillance on your family in 1997.
Caroline had been targeted for manipulation and eventual murder for 28 years. Detective Williams was taking notes furiously.
We're going to need you to provide testimony against Precision Services and any other clients you've worked with. Already agreed to that, Helen said. But there's something else you need to know. Robert Blackwood wasn't just a client. He was a partner.
Marcus leaned forward. What does that mean?
It means he helped us identify other clients, wealthy individuals with family problems they needed solved discreetly. He'd recommend our services, take a percentage of the fee, and sometimes provide logistical support for operations.
The scope of my father's crimes kept expanding beyond anything I could have imagined.
How many people? Detective Williams asked.
Helen shrugged.
Hard to say exactly. Robert was involved in at least 30 operations over the years. Some were just surveillance or intimidation. Others were, she gestured vaguely, more permanent solutions.
I felt sick, not just because of what my father had done, but because of what this meant for everyone who'd benefited from his success.
The house we'd grown up in, the business that employed hundreds of people, the trust funds that had paid for our educations, all of it was built on a foundation of murder and extortion.
There's one more thing, Helen said, looking directly at me. Your father left specific instructions about what should happen if his crimes were ever exposed. She pulled out a final document. If anyone in the family turned against him posthumously, we were authorized to eliminate not just them but anyone they might have told. Spouses, children, close friends. My blood turned to ice. What does that mean?
It means, Detective Williams said grimly, that by exposing your father's crimes, you've put everyone you care about in danger. The next 48 hours were a blur of FBI raids, asset freezes, and emergency protective custody. Precision Services was shut down. Helen Zhang's testimony led to arrests across 3 states. The financial investigation revealed a network of corruption that reached into dozens of other businesses and family fortunes. But for us, the immediate concern was staying alive. The good news, Agent Sarah Collins told us during our debriefing, is that Helen Zhang was the only active operative assigned to your case. With her in custody and Precision Services shut down, you're not in immediate danger. The bad news? James asked. There are at least 40 people who benefited from your father's services over the years. Some of them have resources and connections that could make them very dangerous if they think you might expose their secrets. We were looking at months, possibly years, of legal proceedings, investigations, and potential threats from people whose crimes might be revealed by our father's records. Emma had the hardest time processing everything. I keep thinking about all the patients I've saved, all the good I thought I was doing with the education Dad paid for. Was any of it real? Does any of it matter if it was built on murder? It matters, Maria said quietly. The people you saved are still alive. The good you've done is still real, even if the money that made it possible came from evil. Robert had thrown himself into working with the FBI, using his business knowledge to help trace the financial networks Dad had used to launder money and fund illegal operations. I spent 15 years wondering why my father abandoned us, he told me one evening as we sat in the FBI safe house. Turns out, he didn't abandon us. He murdered our mother and then pretended we didn't exist. Caroline was staying with her sister in Florida under federal protection while the investigation continued. The last time I talked to her, she sounded hollow, like someone who'd been gutted and was trying to figure out how to keep living. I loved him, she told me, even knowing what he did. Part of me still loves the man I thought he was. How do you reconcile that? I didn't have an answer for her. I was struggling with the same question. James made the decision that surprised everyone. He liquidated Blackwood Industries entirely,
I can't run a company built on blood money, he told the family meeting we held via video conference from various FBI safe houses. I can't employ people with money earned through murder. I can't pretend any of this is legitimate. The liquidation would provide some compensation for Dad's victims and their families, but it would also put hundreds of innocent employees out of work. We'll help them find new jobs, Emma said. Use whatever money we have left to provide transition funding, retraining, job placement services. What money? I asked. Everything Dad owned is either evidence in a criminal case or tainted by his crimes. Then we start over, James said simply. All of us. Clean slate. It was Marcus who pointed out the elephant in the room. There's still the question of the storage unit inheritance. Technically, Victoria, you're the legal owner of all the evidence against your father. You could destroy it, walk away, let sleeping dogs lie. Everyone looked at me. My siblings, biological and chosen, the FBI agents, the lawyers, the prosecutors building cases against dozens of criminals who'd used Dad's services, the people whose lives depended on me doing the right thing. Even if it destroyed everything I'd ever thought was real about my life. No, I said. We finished this. All of it. Every crime. Every victim. Every person who hired my father to solve their problems with murder. We expose all of it. Agent Collins nodded approvingly. It's going to be a long road. Years of trials, death threats, media attention. Your father's crimes are going to be front-page news. Then that's what it takes, I said. Emma reached across the table and took my hand. We do this together, all of us. James nodded. Whatever it costs, whatever we lose, we make this right. Robert and Maria exchanged glances. Then Maria spoke for both of them. We're family now, real family, built on truth instead of lies. Caroline's voice came through the video call, weak but determined. Your father took away my choice about everything for 27 years. I'm not letting him take away my choice about this. We do the right thing.
The trials are still ongoing. Helen Jung's testimony has led to convictions in 12 states. The Precision Services files have exposed a network of corruption that reached into politics, business, and law enforcement at every level. 63 people have been arrested. 47 families have received some measure of justice for crimes they thought would never be solved. The Blackwood mansion was sold, with the proceeds going to victim compensation funds. The business was liquidated, but James managed to help 90% of the employees find new jobs. Emma finished her residency and now works at a free clinic, using her medical skills to help people who can't afford traditional health care. James started his own construction company, building affordable housing for low-income families. It's small, honest work that pays a fraction of what he made at Blackwood Industries, and he's never been happier. Caroline moved to Colorado to be closer to her grandchildren. She's in therapy, trying to process 27 years of marriage to a man who never existed. Some days are better than others. Robert and Maria have become real siblings to us, filling the spaces in our family that we didn't even know were empty. We have Sunday dinners now, not in a mansion bought with blood money, but in James's modest apartment, eating takeout and playing board games and talking about everything except the past. As for me, I went back to teaching art classes. Turns out there's something healing about watching children create beauty with their own hands. Something pure about colors on canvas that has nothing to do with money or murder or family legacies built on lies. I still have nightmares sometimes. Dreams where I'm back in that storage unit, opening folders full of evidence that my entire life was a lie.
Dreams where Helen Zhang succeeds in poisoning Caroline. Where Dad's other victims never get justice. Where I choose family loyalty over truth. But mostly, I sleep peacefully now. Because I know that when I was faced with the choice between protecting the people I loved and doing what was right, I found a way to do both. The inheritance that destroyed my family wasn't money or property or business assets, it was the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the most valuable thing you can inherit. Even when it costs you everything else you thought you owned. My name is Victoria Blackwood, and I am the daughter of a serial killer who loved me enough to trust me with the power to stop him. It took me 33 years to understand that sometimes, the greatest act of love is destroying the lies that people use to protect you from who they really are. And sometimes, the only way to honor someone's memory is to make sure the world knows exactly who they were. Monster and father, killer and provider, the man who tucked me in at night and the man who planned my murder. The truth doesn't care if it destroys your family. But it might just save your soul.